Chris and Brad approached me about doing this talk, talking about Federal High Command dysfunction. I have to admit, I was a little hesitant, a little confused, and as I got into it, I got more and more confused. This is the type of thing that can actually make your hair hurt, okay? And then I got to thinking, I remembered something that Joe Harsh was fond of saying. Chronology, chronology, chronology. And so I decided to approach this subject with a timeline. Now we're talking about Harpers Ferry, and of course, if you've ever been there, I mean, you know Maryland Heights dominates Harpers Ferry. And almost every personage of the campaign that was there, they comment about Maryland Heights dominating Harpers Ferry. Now, I'm going to begin with May 7th, 1861. And I'm going to begin with Confederate General Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson, because he occupies Harpers Ferry in 1861. And he communicates with Robert E. Lee and writes him, "I have finished reconnoitering the Maryland Heights and have determined to fortify them at once and hold them." And Jackson actually constructs a stockade on Maryland Heights. And this illustration comes from Lossing's pictorial field book of the Civil War. I've used Lossing's illustrations before, and if there's any veracity to Lossing's illustration, you know, that's a substantial structure. So Jackson builds a stockade on Maryland Heights. He occupies Maryland Heights. And by the way, Jackson's occupation of Maryland Heights technically is the first movement north by the Confederacy, making the Maryland campaign technically the second movement north by the Confederacy. Now, of course, Johnson assumes command, and in a couple of weeks, the Confederates withdraw from Harpers Ferry. And of course, we all recognize this gentleman. This is General George B. McClellan. And on November 1st, 1861, McClellan is appointed General-in-Chief of the armies of the United States. Now, some people tend to confuse General-in-Chief with Commander-in-Chief, and sometimes use the terms interchangeable. The General-in-Chief is the commander of the United States armies. The Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, commands all of the armed forces of the United States. So there is the distinction. So November 1st, 1861, McClellan is appointed General-in-Chief. Now this is Dixon S. Miles, and you'll hear his name a lot today. He was a native of Maryland, born in Baltimore County in 1804. He entered West Point at the age of 15, and in 1824 graduated 27th in the class of 31. Prior to the Mexican War, he saw service in Florida, Arkansas, and Texas. In the war with Mexico, he earned brevets for gallantry at Palo Alto and Monterey. His post-war service saw him fighting the Apache and Navajo in the New Mexican Territory. In January 1859, Miles was promoted to colonel and commanded the 2nd U.S. Infantry at the outbreak of the Civil War. his conduct at the Battle of First Manassas proved ruinous to his career. He was accused of drunkenness by then Colonel Israel B. Richardson. And in November 6, 1861, there was a court of inquiry to look into Richardson's charges. Now, a court of inquiry is not a court-martial. A court of inquiry seeks to find if there is enough evidence to warrant a court-martial. And there was a series of statements of facts that the inquiry found. And the main thing is that they found that Richardson was justified in applying the term drunkenness to Miles' conduct. Now, in his defense, it should be noted that at First Manassas, Miles suffered from dysenteric diarrhea, for which he was given opium, quinine pills, and brandy. All right, so no wonder Richardson thought he was drunk, okay? And it was not unusual in Victorian times for opium to be freely given for a variety of illnesses. However, First Manassas was not an isolated incident. In June of 1857, in New Mexico, Miles was so heavily drunk that he fell from his horse. Now, there was a court-martial, but Miles was acquitted because the main witness did not drink out of the same bottle that Miles did, and therefore could not prove that the contents were intoxicating. By March 1862, when Colonel Miles arrived for garrison duty at Harpers Ferry, he was 58 years old and had been a soldier for 43 years. And, it was seen as, duty to a backwater post for an officer whose career was winding down. Now, on March 11th, 1862, McClellan was relieved of duty as General-in-Chief. Right? He was still a Major General in the Army, but he was relieved of duty as General-in-Chief. Now, from March 11th, 1862, to July 11th, 1862, there was no General-in-Chief. President Lincoln becomes de facto acting General-in-Chief. Lincoln and Stanton. Whoops, wrong one. Lincoln and Stanton, okay? Two attorneys with little or no military experience running the entire Union war effort, sometimes at the tactical level. Now, this is Emory Upton. Some of you may recognize him. He's known as the father of the modern U.S. Army staff system, the only U.S. serviceman in the Civil War to have seen active duty in all three branches of the Army: infantry, artillery, and cavalry. And he wrote a book called The Military Policy of the United States. And while he was researching his book, he wrote a letter to his friend, James A. Garfield. And this is what he had to say about this time period. You will remember that from the 11th of March till the 11th of July, 1862, we had no General-in-Chief. Our armies were commanded by the President and Secretary of War. Could I lay before you all the facts that have come under my observation, I believe you would be convinced that the cause of a 4 instead of a 1 year's war can all be traced to this brief but disastrous period. According to Emory Upton, high command dysfunction existed well before the siege of Harpers Ferry. This is Brigadier General Rufus Saxon, and on May 26, 1862, he was called to the defense of Harpers Ferry, and he would mount a defense that some historians describe as a textbook example of how to defend Harpers Ferry, how to defend the position. And he has to do that because of this gentleman once again, because of Stonewall Jackson. Jackson, at this time, is conducting his Valley campaign. And if you look at the extreme upper right of the map, you will see Harpers Ferry, and you will see Jackson approaching Harpers Ferry. Now, Jackson will actually occupy Bolivar Heights. Now, what Saxon does is that he puts a artillery battery, all right, known as the naval battery. Too many things to keep track of. He puts the naval battery on Maryland Heights. And Maryland Heights has an elevation at the top of at least 1,200 feet above sea level. Opposite Maryland Heights is Loudon Heights, about 1,000 feet above sea level. Bolivar Heights is about 600 feet above sea level, gradually sloping down to Harpers Ferry, which is around 400 feet above sea level. The naval battery is approximately 680 feet above sea level. And Saxton will set up a line of infantry at Camp Hill, and he'll have infantry on Maryland Heights. Now, if you've ever been up to the naval battery, you know there's an interpretive marker there. And on that marker, there's some information, about the guns that were used. They were 9-inch Dahlgren guns and had a shell weight of 70 pounds. The tube weighed 9,000 pounds, and the maximum range was about 2 miles. Now, what this allows Saxton to do, it allows him to shell Loudon Heights, causing the enemy to withdraw from Loudon Heights. All right, so those guns can reach Loudon Heights, no problem. He established a contracted line on Camp Hill, which freed up more troops to protect the naval battery. Now, from his report, he says about this contracted line, being much less extended, it could be held by a smaller force, the enemy, from the nature of the ground, being unable to bring into action a larger force than our own. And you can see how the ground, would funnel any opposing force into that contracted line. Second, it would enable us to bring our naval battery on the Maryland Heights to bear on the enemy as they advance down the declivity of Bolivar Heights into the valley which separates it from Camp Hill. So any opposing force, any enemy force, would have to approach downhill, and they would be entirely within the range of those guns. And this is what's has been called a textbook defense of Harpers Ferry. Now, the amazing thing about this is a dispatch that Saxton sends to Secretary of War Stanton, and in this dispatch, you can see he actually names Colonel Miles, my chief of staff. Miles was there. He was Saxton's chief of staff. He saw how to properly conduct a defense of Harpers Ferry. This is Major General John E. Wool. All right? He was born in 1784. He enlisted as a volunteer and was commissioned a captain in the War of 1812. Now, he was an orphan with little formal education. He remained in the military. By 1841, he rose to the rank of brigadier general. He served in the Mexican War. He was one of the 5 generals in active service at the outbreak of the Civil War, promoted major general May 16, 1862. Now, he commanded the Middle Department, which included Harpers Ferry. In 1862, Wool was 78 years old. And I got to be careful criticizing 78 years old. I'm not so far from that myself. He had been a good officer in his time, but he was starting to show the effects of age. He repeated statements he made a few minutes earlier. His hands shook, and he had a habit of often asking his aides if he had put his hat on straight. Now, June 15th, 1862, Wool to Stanton. I have examined Harpers Ferry and find it a very indefensible position. So Wool is there. You know, he does a reconnaissance of the location, and he finds it an indefensible position. He also says men capable of using the large guns should be sent immediately. Evidently, when Saxton withdrew back to Washington, so did all the gunners who knew how to fire the Dahlgren cannons. So he's saying it's indefensible and we need artillerymen. July 11th, 1862, Major General Henry W. Halleck is appointed General-in-Chief of the U.S. Army. All right, Lincoln realized that perhaps he wasn't doing such a good job as acting General-in-Chief, so Halleck is brought to become General-in-Chief. Now, Halleck was born in Westernville, New York on January 16th, and he entered West Point in 1835 and graduated 3rd in the class of 1839. Halleck wrote a book, Elements of Military Art and Science, and it was accepted by West Point as a textbook. This earned Halleck the moniker, the nickname of Old Brains. The Mexican War proved to be a different experience for Halleck. Assigned to the territory of California, he acquired administrative skills rather than combat experience. He left the Army in 1854 to run a law firm. In August 1861, he returned to the Army as a major general. He was assigned the Department of the Missouri. Now, Halleck proved to be more an administrator than a warrior. He seldom left his desk. Old Brains devised the plan and trusted his subordinates to carry out the tactical operation. Now you recognize, this gentleman. This is General John Pope. Now in the summer of 1862, during acting General-in-Chief Lincoln's disappointment in McClellan's Peninsula campaign, General John Pope advised, if Halleck were here, you would have, Mr. President, a competent advisor who would put this matter right. Now, many of us recognize this gentleman. This is Ezra A. Carman, a familiar name to those of us who studied the Maryland campaign. He wrote a manuscript on the campaign, and he had something to say about Halleck's appointment as General-in-Chief. And what Carman wrote was, in many respects, the selection of Halleck was an unfortunate one for the country. He soon perceived what action would be most agreeable to Stanton and those who sided with him. Now, of course, this is Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. And basically, Carman is saying that Halleck soon becomes a Stanton toady. Now, Lincoln. In Henry Halleck, Lincoln found a valuable technical advisor and a political tool. Old brains provided Lincoln with the kind of military technical information that the president, a military neophyte, did not possess. Politically, Halleck served Lincoln well. Halleck became the perfect foil for Lincoln. When the president decided upon some unpopular course of action, such as firing a general, he had Halleck sign the order. Lincoln could then feign ignorance or give the impression that others were controlling him. Often, when facing inquiries about military decisions, Lincoln would respond, "I wish not to control, that I now leave to General Halleck." Or, "You must call on General Halleck, who commands." August 28th, 1862, General Wool issues Special Orders number 77. By command of Major General Wool, construction of a blockhouse on Maryland Heights above the battery in order to protect it from a flank movement of the enemy and prevent him from taking possession of the heights. All right, so a general order issued to construct a blockhouse. And there was nothing peculiar or unique about a blockhouse. It was a standard military fortification. This is an illustration from a standard textbook of the day. Looks a lot like the blockhouse, that Jackson built on Maryland Heights. Now, although there was a standing order to construct it, Colonel Miles never did. September 2nd, 1862. All right, September 2nd, 1862. In a letter to his wife, Halleck complains, "I have scarcely slept for the last 4 nights and am almost worn out." He also reveals that he has developed very severe hemorrhoids. Now, we need to take our 8th grade locker room sense of humor and set it aside for a minute. Victorian physicians often prescribed opium suppositories or opium paregorics taken internally for such severe cases. In September 1862, Halleck's use of opium to deal with his hemorrhoids and related severe diarrhea may have caught up with him. He may have also been using laudanum to anesthetize himself against the pain of his physical ailments, and using alcohol to deal with opium withdrawal symptoms. Kind of a vicious cycle. You get hooked on opium, you withdraw from that, you use alcohol to ease that pain, your ailment flares up again. Now, as late as September 9th, he informs his wife that he was still obliged most of the time to lie upon the couch. All right, so he is suffering a debilitating physical ailment, and as is common in Victorian times, opium is prescribed. This is Julius White, Brigadier General Julius White. Now, he was born September 23rd, 1816, in New York, relocated in Chicago, Illinois at age of 20, became a prominent insurance agent and underwriter. At the outbreak of the Civil War, he was a customs collector for the Port of Chicago. Now, he was a civilian soldier. He entered the war as colonel of the 37th Illinois Volunteers, promoted brigadier general June 9th, 1862. During Second Manassas, he was posted at Martinsburg, Virginia. Of course, today, West Virginia. In September 1862, he commanded a Union garrison at Winchester. September 2nd, Halleck to White. You will immediately abandon the fortifications at Winchester. You will withdraw your whole force to Harpers Ferry. Now, Halleck issues this order, and it appears that he did not advise or consult either Stanton or Wool. He just orders White to evacuate Winchester. And consequently, White moves to Harper's Ferry. Now, Stanton and Wool, they considered Winchester the key to the valley. September 2nd, Lincoln and Halleck visit McClellan at his house. And Lincoln issues a verbal order putting McClellan in command of all the troops inside Washington, D.C. It's a verbal order, and McClellan is to command all the troops inside of Washington. Now, later in the day, there are two written orders that appear. And the first one, you can see, by direction of the President, Major General McClellan will have command of the fortifications of Washington and all the troops for the defense of the capital by order of the Secretary of War. Now, Stanton is working in the background. He wants nothing to do with McClellan. He absolutely despises McClellan. For both Stanton and Lincoln, with the second order that appears that day, there is plausible deniability. All right? That second order traces back to Halleck. Now look at the second order. Same day, same language, but no mention of the President, no mention of the Secretary of War, by order of Major General Halleck. All right, Halleck becomes the fall guy for Lincoln and Stanton. September 3rd, Miles to Wool. September 3rd. White evacuated his fortifications at Winchester last night. In the middle one, Brigadier General White has just arrived. Now, look at Wool's response. I have received your dispatch. Okay, he's received them. I must leave the course you ought to pursue to your own sound discretion. Take care of your position and not expose it to surprise. Watchfulness, vigilance, and sound discretion must be your guide at the present moment. September 4th, 1862. Now, when I was researching and I came across this series of dispatch, I sort of nicknamed them, wait, what? All right? So I know these as the wait what dispatches, okay? Now, look at the top one, okay? It's Wool to Miles, and there's language about the 12th Regiment. They ought not to think of leaving until we know what the enemy at Winchester intends to do. Now, this indicates that Wool still thinks Winchester is occupied by White. Right? Wool is not aware that White is not at Winchester. And then he ends that, if that regiment, if they move, okay, to go before, the regiment will forever be branded as cowards. So in Wool's mind, retreat is cowardice, especially if there's no enemy to retreat from, all right? And then at the bottom, Miles to Wood, General White abandoned Winchester, no enemy in the valley. All right, he's repeating what he told him the day before. Then this shows up. I understand that Winchester has been abandoned without the approach or presence of an enemy, and that has not been occupied by the rebels. Answer immediately. All right, so it's as if, Wool, although he said he received the dispatches the day before, it's as if he didn't read them or didn't understand them, okay? And then we get a series of other dispatches, okay? General White will either repair to this place, Baltimore, or join the Army of the Potomac. And then if you look at the middle one, the order making disposition of Brigadier General White is countermanded. He is ordered to repair to Martinsburg and take command of all troops in and about that place, guarding the railroad and defending that place to the last extremity. Answer immediately. Now, this is the first instance I found of that language, to the last extremity. And it's noteworthy that it's what Wool intends to tell White. He doesn't say this to Miles at this time. And then the last one, he instructs Miles, learn the whereabouts of the enemy. If I don't have White at Winchester, then, the duty falls to you. All right, so these are the wait what dispatches. Then we have same day, September 4th, Wool to White. You will repair to Martinsburg. All right, you will go to Martinsburg. You will adopt the most active and energetic measures to protect and defend that place and the road occupied by troops under your command. The most sleepless energy is expected. So, White is now sent to Martinsburg. Now, sometime on September 3rd or September 4th, I couldn't pin it down exactly. And this is according to something McClellan writes in McClellan's own story. He's visited by Secretary of the Interior William H. Seward. And Seward asked McClellan about Harpers Ferry. And according to McClellan, this is what he answered. I regarded the arrangements there as exceedingly dangerous, that, in my opinion, the proper course was to abandon the position and unite the garrison to the main army of operations. I added that if it were determined to hold the position, the existing arrangements were all wrong, as it would be easy for the enemy to surround and capture the garrison, and that the garrison ought at least to be withdrawn to the Maryland Heights, where they could resist attack until relieved. All right, so the position's dangerous. Hey, withdraw them, add them to the field army. If you don't want to do that, take them up to Maryland Heights. Now, Halleck, Seward and McClellan visit Halleck and repeat the same. Now, Halleck had retired for the night, but received them in his bedroom. And according to McClellan, Halleck received my statement with ill-concealed contempt, said that everything was all right, as it was, that my views were entirely erroneous, etc., and soon bowed us out, leaving matters at Harpers Ferry precisely as they were. Now, Halleck to Wool, September 5th, 1862. So this is either 1 or 2 days after McClellan and Seward visit Halleck. I find it impossible to get this army into the field again in large force for a day or two. In the meantime, Harpers Ferry may be attacked and overwhelmed. I leave all dispositions there to your experience and local knowledge. I beg leave, however, to suggest the propriety of withdrawing all our forces in the vicinity to Maryland Heights. I have no personal knowledge of the ground and merely make the suggestion to you. So 1 or 2 days before, McClellan suggests taking the garrison up to Maryland Heights. Halleck poo-poos it, and then the next day he writes to Wool, well, you could draw the garrison up to Maryland Heights, okay? Now, September 5th, Wool to Miles. Whoops, wait a minute, sorry. Okay, we got that. Yeah, Wool to Miles. Be energetic and active and defend all places to the last extremity. There you are, he's telling that to Miles now. There must be no abandoning of a post, and shoot the first man who thinks of it, whether officer or soldier. Okay? Then there's this dispatch, the position on the heights. All right? Now, this order is vague. What is Wool talking about? Is he talking about Maryland Heights? Is he talking about Bolivar Heights? All right? It's a vague order, and you could see how Miles could look at this and he could think Bolivar Heights. All right? So that makes a big difference, as we've seen. If you're going to try and defend Bolivar Heights or Maryland Heights. Okay, September 6th, Wool to White. Defend yourself to the last extremity. No running before the enemy is coming. Reconnoiter. This suggests Wool is unaware of Halleck's September 2nd order to White. And then September 6th, same day, Lincoln and Halleck again visit McClellan at his home. Lincoln verbally instructs McClellan, General, you will take command of the forces in the field. All right? I found no mention of Harpers Ferry. September 7th, Stanton to White. It is expected that no post will be surrendered, but that every officer and every man shall fight as if the fate of the government depended upon it. No post will be surrendered. Stanton, always in the background. Halleck to Miles. Our army is in motion. It is important that Harpers Ferry be held to the latest moment. The government has the utmost confidence in you and is ready to give you full credit for the defense it expects you to make. Okay? Halleck to Wool. And this is the first instance that I find of, Lincoln to Wool. This is the first instance I find of Lincoln asking about Harpers Ferry. It's on September 7th. Now, on September 7th, McClellan is at Rockville, and he has 4 campaign objectives: cover Baltimore and Washington, prevent the anticipated Confederate movement into Pennsylvania, force the enemy out of Maryland back into Virginia, and don't screw the pooch like Pope. Now, September 8th, Halleck and McClellan. McClellan to Halleck, have you anything from Colonel Miles today? If it is practicable, I would recommend that Colonel Miles be required to report at least twice every day. Halleck in response, nothing from Colonel Miles. That's a half-truth. Halleck was sitting on correspondence from General Wool that verified a Confederate occupation of Frederick. September 10th, Miles to White. And this one, threw me. You need to look here, all right? And this is Miles writing McClellan, who is General-in-Chief, Halleck being Secretary of War. All right, now Miles knew that Halleck was General-in-Chief, not McClellan. Miles knew that Stanton was Secretary of War, not Halleck, but yet he's writing this to White. Now, I don't mean to overreact, but this caused me to somewhat question his mental state on September 10th. Now, September 11th, Halleck and McClellan again. McClellan to Halleck. Colonel Miles is at or near Harpers Ferry. He can do nothing more where he is, but could be of great service if ordered to join me. I suggest that he is ordered at once to join me by the most practical route. And then Halleck back. There is no way for Colonel Miles to join you at present. His only chance is to defend his works till you can open communication with him. When you do so, he will be subject to your orders. Now, Carman, all right, this is how he described Halleck's response. Had Halleck given a candid reply to McClellan's request, it would read, in defiance of all sound military principles, we have kept Colonel Miles so long at Harper's Ferry to hold an indefensible position that he is now surrounded and cannot escape, and is peremptorily ordered not to escape if he could. But if you can relieve him from the trap in which we have placed him, you are welcome to his services. Now, this alters McClellan's campaign objectives. All right? In addition to the four before, he now has a fifth one, and that is open communication with Harper's Ferry. September 12th, White returns to Harper's Ferry. Although he's a brigadier general, he defers command to Miles. Now, September 12th, McClellan learns in the morning that Lee has left Frederick, moving in two different directions. Now, this gives McClellan the option of inserting his forces in between the separated parts and beating Lee in detail. But at the same time, he's under orders, all right, to relieve Harper's Ferry. So, September 13th, McLaws captures Harper's Ferry, and it's the beginning of the end for Harper's Ferry. Now, on September 13th, McClellan issues orders to William Franklin. Having gained the pass, Crampton's Gap, your duty will be first to cut off, destroy, or capture McLaw's command and relieve Colonel Miles. This is McClellan's paper trail showing that he has followed Halleck's orders. All right? He has ordered Franklin to relieve Miles at Harper's Ferry. And of course, the next day, September 14th, we have the Battle of South Mountain. And this is the operational situation. Franklin, all right, going to Crampton's Gap, and Burnside's 9th Corps to the Northern Gaps, Turners, and Foxes. Now, McClellan, Halleck, and Maryland Heights. September 14th, a courier from Colonel Miles, who left in the night, has just arrived and says Colonel Miles is surrounded by a large force of the enemy, but thinks he can hold out for 2 days. General White has joined him. If he holds out today, I think I can probably save him. The whole army is moving as rapidly as possible. The enemy is in possession of Maryland Heights. On the 16th, I learned that Colonel Miles surrendered at 8 a.m. yesterday unconditionally. I fear his resistance was not so stubborn as it might have been. Had he held Maryland Heights, he would inevitably have been saved. You know, this is McClellan's way of saying, I told you so. Now, after the Maryland campaign, the Harpers Ferry Commission was formed on the 23rd of September, 1862. And it was formed to investigate just what happened. Now, I want to call your name, or I want to call your attention to a name at the bottom, Captain Don Piatt, okay? Now, Ezra Carman, in his book, in his manuscript, he said that the commission, was formed for one purpose and one purpose only. It had done what it was organized to do, to condemn McClellan. Don Piatt, all right, the name I pointed out to you. He wrote, "We had not been in session 24 hours before it was understood at the Executive Mansion, the White House, and in the War Department that the fault was in McClellan. How this came to be the opinion of the board, no one could explain. It seemed to pervade the atmosphere." Now, Don Piatt was no friend of George McClellan, and he criticized him at other times. But he also wrote this about the commission. Harper's Ferry was lost, not through any fault of McClellan, but from the treachery, cowardice, and stupidity of the officers left there for the defense. Had not Maryland Heights been abandoned, the place could have been held until McClellan came to the rescue. Now, Halleck gets his chance to stab McClellan in the back. General McClellan, after having received orders to repel the enemy invading the state of Maryland, marched only 6 miles per day on the average when pursuing the invading army. Now, if you will allow me a moment of shameless self-promotion, any of you who have read Too Useful to Sacrifice know that Halleck's statement on 6 miles a day is not supported by the historical record. And if you have not read Too Useful to Sacrifice, I would suggest that you do. Now, trying to wrap this up really quickly, Miles, okay? A history of alcohol abuse. Although I found no evidence that he was using alcohol during the siege of Harper's Ferry. A strict constructionist of orders, okay? Most people know that, he was ordered to hold Harper's Ferry, not Maryland Heights. The September 10th dispatch, I have to question somewhat his mental acuity. But I can't get past Saxton's defense of Harper's Ferry. Miles was there. He knew how to do it successfully. Now, White, okay, in testimony to the commission, he says that he knew Harper's Ferry was the key, and the garrison should have been taken up to Harper's Ferry. And he was there on the 12th, and he was a brigadier general, and he outranked Miles, who was a colonel. He could have taken the garrison up there. So I think that's only so much, in my opinion, post-event butt covering. Now Halleck, okay, beyond the opium medication, Carmen said that the Harpers Ferry Commission failed to declare that which the evidence proved, that the guilty party was General H.W. Halleck. And I go back to the September 5th dispatch to Wool. I merely suggest, I can't command. I'm the General-in-Chief of the United States Army. Of course I can command. Now General Wool, once again, I got to be careful about criticizing 78-year-olds. Okay, so we're just going to let that go. But in many ways, he was an 18th century military person. That ambiguous order, just one word in front of the heights, Maryland Heights, Bolivar Heights. Now McClellan, of course, if you put any faith in the Harpers Ferry Commission, it's all his fault, all right? Now Stanton maintains a low profile throughout, always in the background. But he's got, the September 7th dispatch to White, no post will be abandoned. Stanton and Lincoln, no paper trail, plausible deniability. Now Stanton, before the Maryland campaign, is overheard to say to Lincoln, all that I do for you. Now I'm going to end with Joe Harsh once again. And in his book, Taken at the Flood, he made a statement that I didn't understand. It was unusual for him. It wasn't footnoted. But now that I've looked through these sources, I can understand it. And Harsh stated that both Stanton and Wool saw Harper's Ferry in a political rather than military light, fearing abandonment would be equated by the public with cowardice and dereliction of duty. They ordered the post held to the last man. Now, in the final analysis, you're going to have to decide for yourself, because quite frankly, my hair hurts. All right.